to welcome you back. See lots of people are catching up online after the session too on the website. So and heard lots of very positive comments. So it's great to have you back to take us into the civil wars. And I will stop talking. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's great to be back. So hello, everyone. At the end of our last session, we got to grips with the Elizabethan settlement and the withdrawal from the extremes of both continental Protestantism and Roman Catholicism. It was an act of supremacy over splintering factions that allowed Queen Elizabeth, in religious terms at least, to rule without major turbulence. Her musicians heaped praises upon her, and she felt highly enough of them to confer additional financial emoluments upon them. We touched briefly upon the Tallis-Bird partnership in music publishing. Their reputation and sway with the Queen gave them exclusive rights to print manuscript paper and to publish music. Unimaginable today, but a totally normal act in Elizabethan England. As Thomas Tomkins is offering in Thomas Morley's sycophantic collection of magicals concludes, oh, hang on, that wasn't meant to happen, right? It's meant to be that one. The demigods pray to the gods supernal, her life, her wealth, her fame may be eternal. Someone seems to be controlling my screen who is not me. So please leave it alone. Don't click YouTube. Oh God. It's done really well now. Okay.
What's happening there?
Right. Someone is controlling my screen, so I'm just going to stop share, and we're going to hold for 2 seconds.
Don't know how that's happened, Ben.
I don't know either, but whoever's in the chat, can they stop controlling my screen? That's me being now polite. So we're just going to no. Okay, this is really embarrassing, so I'm not particularly pleased about this. I
just would it help if I reclaimed the host? Would that?
Daniel, are you able to jump in quickly? I think something's going on here, and I'm not particularly pleased about it because it's either someone's making a dog's dinner. No, it's fine. Oh no, we're okay. You're host now. Good.
I'm host. Okay.
I think it seems someone had kindly tried to help me along, which was marvelous, but I
didn't see how anyone could have done that by you.
I don't know. So interesting. So let's share screen. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Is that?
Shall I make you host again, or just try again?
Would you mind?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know how that happened.
This happens on meetings, so I'm sure it was an accident. Yeah,
well,
yeah. I'm just very glad it wasn't anything embarrassing because I've been in meetings where that's happened.
Oh gosh. Okay. There we go. I'm making you host.
Marvelous.
And if everyone can.
Yeah, please don't. Yeah, if something comes up, please don't click on it because otherwise we're going to have an absolute nightmare. So let's get that up, and I'll just do a bit of jiggery pokery with this. Yes. Hold on, I've just made Daniel co-host of my screen. Okay, if you wouldn't mind not. Do you want to control my screen or shall I? You've just closed my screen. Okay. It's really going well. Everyone, I'm sorry about this. We're usually better with technology. Give me a second. Can everyone see the screen? Marvelous. And they can see music and worship up there?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not, there we go. Daniel, is that you asking to remote control my screen?
No, it isn't.
That's where we've got our problem then, lawyers. Okay, well, we're going to ignore them.
I don't know what.
Someone else in here is Cathedral Theology Network. So
that's me. Oh, right.
That's the two.
Oh gosh, can you get rid of them? The one which is purple. Oh. Okay.
Let me just do that now.
Disappeared.
It's disappeared now. They know we're on to them. Everyone, I'm sorry about that. Can you see Queen Elizabeth in her glory here with a bit of? Can someone confirm that to me? That
yes.
You see? Yeah, thank you. Right, so let's start. So we were talking about Elizabeth's beneficence to her musicians. As Thomas Tomkins' offering in Morley's sycophantic collection of magicals concludes, the demigods pray to the gods supernal, her life, her wealth, her fame may be eternal. Then sang the shepherds and nymphs of Diana, long live fair Oriana. The collection published in 1601 was extant with Oriana for only 2 years, as Elizabeth died in 1603, ending with her the Tudor dynasty and the tight grip of stability that she had held through her 43-year reign. Within a short period of the accession of James I, further work was undertaken to secure worship. The Hampton Court Conference and the canons of 1604 formed the penultimate pieces of the puzzle that led us to the finalized 1662 Book of Common Prayer. The 1604 canons were the legal base of the Church of England up until their revision in 1947. Puritans believed that at the beginning of the new reign, they had the best chance of securing agreement to a number of proposals put forward in what had been termed the millenary petition. Many of these were to try and push the Elizabethan settlement toward a more extreme Protestant interpretation. So the sign of the cross in baptism and the blessing of rings in marriage being seen as superstitious, the use of the cap, the mortarboard, and surplice not to be mandatory, that a sermon always be mandatory at the communion, that terms priest and absolution must be examined. Most of these are old favorites of the Puritans. The new king, however, was not prepared to be a pushover and assembled a conference at Hampton Court in January 1604. The consensus was represented by 8 bishops, 7 deans, and 2 cathedral doctors of divinity. The award of DD to clergy in senior roles was nigh on universal by this point. The Puritans were limited to 4 spokespeople. The king set the agenda as the general absolution, the confirmation of children, private baptism by women, as in cases where the child was not expected to survive, midwives often administered baptism in extremis, the insufficiencies in authorized or commended catechisms, inaccuracies in biblical translation, inaccuracies in the prayer book, the inclusion of the Apocrypha in the lectionary. Within 3 days, consensus was reached and settlement restored. The title of the absolution received a clarification by defining it in the rubric as of the pronouncing of the remission of sins. To confirmation was to be added catechizing or examination of the children's faith. The new catechism would have an expanded section relating to the doctrine both of baptism and of Holy Communion. A Bible without marginal notes, in other words, alternative explanatories, would be used in each church in the realm. Lessons from the Apocrypha found incompatible with canonical scripture would be omitted from the lectionary and not read. The text of the marriage service would be changed to improve clarity and understanding. The rings too would be blessed and stay. It was agreed that private baptism would be reserved to ministers and curates alone, removing that extremist provision that allowed for any Christian to baptize, should a minister not be to hand. The use of the sign of the cross would be retained, although it was made clear that it was merely signative and not, as the liturgist Geoffrey Cumming described, as a sign effective. Something really funny is going on with this tonight. So I'm hoping some of you are able to hear and see me.
Yeah, I think there's a bot, actually. And I know if I reclaim, it keeps impersonating other accounts.
Including yourself, which is really quite worrying.
Yeah.
Do you want to reclaim?
If I reclaim host, and when it comes up again, I'll get rid of it. Yeah.
Okay. Are you able to share my screen and? Can I? Oh right, I can't share my screen if you're host.
There is one now impersonating Tim Pullen. If the Tim Pullen who is genuinely here could unmute himself.
Everyone seems to be muted.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on.
Hello.
Hi, Tim.
Hello.
Tim. Right,
I was muted.
Yeah. No, that's fine, Tim.
That's fine. That's fine. Stay there.
This technology fun because I can't see any of you, because mostly I can see some of you, because some of you lovely people keep your cameras on, but I can't see any of you.
I think this person now, it's Malcolm Lillies. So Malcolm, the real Malcolm, unblocks himself.
You mean?
Oh dear, it's now disappeared.
We've got 3. No, we've still got 2 Tims.
You're muted again.
No, start the video.
Sorry?
Oh, start the video.
Okay.
Yes, do video, Tim. Yeah. If we all put our videos on, that would probably unmask the person.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I think I've got rid of him.
Marvelous. Has this happened in any of your other lectures?
No, it never has before.
Oh, wow.
But it's really unsettling for you, and I'm really sorry.
No, I tried, and then I thought I was talking to no one, you see. So yeah. I thought then I nearly put cabbage in by accident, trying to see if anyone thought I might be having a turn, but no. So I'm really sorry about this. I've heard of this. I've experienced it happening to other people. You never hope it happens to yourself. So I can't see you, Daniel. So that's
it's fine.
That's purpose.
I think if I make you host again, co-host,
let's go for it.
We'll try again. I'm really sorry, everyone.
No.
We have got a Simon Knight who's just joined. Are you real? Who's now impersonating Paul Rampton? Oh gosh. What are we going to do about that? So Paul, I don't know if you could. Yeah. It is a bot, I think.
Oh, lovely.
I could see 2 Paul Ramptons. Now I can see 1.
That's marvelous.
I think I've just removed the person again. I wonder if there's a way in which I can now stop people lock meeting. Okay, no one else can join. So I think we're there. Okay, I'm going to now make you co-host again, and we'll sorry for this excitement, everybody. Now no one else can join, so I think we should be all right. I think we are safe. Right.
Hoping. Oh, marvelous. I'm host again. Oh, hold on, let me go back. No. Apologies, everyone. Right, can we all see Hampton Court Conference 1603 and general absolution? Marvelous,
Yes.
great. So that's what I've just been talking about. So the canons of 1604 gave Puritans little celebration either. The offices were to be said on all holy days and their eves, as appointed by the prayer book in Canon 13. In regards to baptism, godparents must have received Holy Communion, Canon 29. The wearing of the surplice is reinforced by Canon 58, and each church is to include a stone font, Canon 87. A decent communion table, which ordinarily is covered in a silk carpet, what we'd now describe as a Laudian frontal, and that a fair linen cloth must cover it at the Holy Communion. The communion table is to be placed in a convenient place for hearing and for communicating. Nay, Volta haters, take note. To replace the spoiled reredos of the pre-Henrican age, the Decalogue is to be inscribed on the east wall, along with other suitable sentences, Canon 82, a pulpit, Canon 83, an alms chest, Canon 84, a Bible and prayer book by Canon 90 are to be set up in the church, as well as a table for the prohibited degrees of marriage, Canon 99. Whilst the temporary peace may have endured, mutterings and dissatisfaction were far from the mind. The 1606 publication, A Survey of the Book of Common Prayer, set out arguments against the 1549 and 1552 rites, as well as the newly enforced canons, pointing out believed inconsistencies and weaknesses. Their argument culminated in an appeal to dispense with the 1552 rite and settle upon the use of the Scottish Reformed Book of Common Order, which would guarantee parity and unity of worship in both kingdoms. So for the oncoming battle, we know what the Puritans want. We see in this period the beginnings, though, of a unique compositional genre that developed and remained popular throughout the 16th, 17th, and even into the 18th centuries, the verse anthem. In the verse anthem, the music alternates between sections for a solo voice or voices, the verse, and the full choir, the chorus. The organ provided accompaniment in liturgical settings. Now, some evidence suggests concerts or viols were used for secular performance, but as hard as many in the 70s try to argue this, I don't believe it, and neither do many other modern scholars. They didn't really use viols in worship. It may have happened at the Chapel Royal, it may have happened in eclectic places, but as a norm, absolutely did not happen. This form has been described as the choir master's dream. For the chorus parts often are very simple, whilst the soloist is given free rein, utilizing ornament, the trilly bit, as was fashionable. The verse anthems were popular for, in many cases, their ease of composition and for their audible presentation of the text. One of the best known examples of this is Orlando Gibbons's This is the Record of John. And if you don't know it, please listen to it afterwards, because it is a superb example of this genre. The opening leaves us in no doubt of the genre, a declamatory rhythmic enunciation of the title, This is the Record of John, which sets the pace for each of the solo sections. This declamatory narration by the countertenor, the alto, demonstrates Gibbon's mastery of the verse anthem, matching music and words both rhythmically and melodically, producing a perfectly natural projection of the text. The chorus reiteration at the close of each solo section adds interest, gives the soloist a well-earned rest, but shows the genius of this strange art form. In the final solo section, the strong denial from the countertenor of, and I won't sing this, I promise, I am the voice that crieth in the wilderness, gives us a vivid picture of the heavily bearded figure of the fanatical Baptist, his eyes blazing with anger, emphatically shaking his head and protesting vigorously that he should be mistaken for the Christ. Whilst we'll see this form again and again throughout the next 150 to 200 years, it'll be a form that flourishes then retreats. It'll peak in the Restoration period, more on that at the end of this session, then slowly trail off into the grey gloop of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. At the start of this course, I promised narrative over black and white notes. As we're heading quickly towards the oncoming Commonwealth period, it's good to look back. And we're going to do this, albeit too briefly, through one family, that of the composer Thomas Tomkins. Now, some would question why I've decided to cover Tomkins in depth over, say, Byrd, Tallis, Gibbons, or any of the plethora of figures in 16th century Britain. But hear out my argument. Tomkins comes from within the institutions he serves, and his family stories tells us of the musician's life in the 16th and early 17th centuries. But more than that, we see the progeny of Father Tomkins and can trace not only his career, but that of Thomas, his son, the composer, but also of his other musical children. Now, here's a confusion with the Tomkinses that a number of eminent scholars have fallen for. As we know, the composer is called Thomas, but his father's also called Thomas, luckily with a middle name of Farrington, so we'll often call him by that, or TF. But then there's a snag which tripped up a lot of researchers in the 50s and 60s. Thomas the composer had an elder brother, also called Thomas. And as we'll explore shortly, this has led to some confusion and could have led to a great deal worse. So let's start at the very beginning. Thomas Farrington Tomkins came to the village city of St. David's from his familial home in Lostwithiel in Cornwall to take a position as vicar choral. Little's known about his musical ability prior, but records show that the Tomkins family had a long association with the cloth trade in their native Cornwall. The first record of TF being in St. David's is his signature as a witness to a deed on 28th of July, 1565. So with this move, TF has uprooted his wife and children to take a preferment to a junior cathedral as a lay vicar choral. Now, vicars choral form the back row of singers, countertenors, tenors, basses. These could be either clergy or lay, and they'd be paid from funds either derived from the lands owned by a cathedral, from tithing a portion of income from canons, or a mixture of both. Vicars choral operated as deputies for the canons in ensuring that their contribution to worship was covered. For clerical vicars, this would be by being present at worship and singing. For lay, it was purely singing the office. At St. David's, like in other foundations, the vicars choral formed a group referred to as the lesser chapter, junior to the greater chapter, who were formed of the dean and canons, but still had their own work and duties which require governance. They, of course, reported to this greater chapter, which is how we find out that all was not well with TF and his domestic arrangements. The first set of chapter papers from July 1571 at St. David's relates to TF and an illicit relationship with a maid, whilst Margaret Poor, the mother of Thomas the composer, was not resident in the close. On July the 14th of that year, TF was admonished by Mr. Chanter, the precentor, to procure and get home his wedded wife, as is supposed, betwixt this present day and one fortnight after Lammas Day next, and for his sinful act committed with his maidservant, etc., though he seemed from the bottom of his heart to be sorry for his offence, yet to give to the poor, namely to David Glover, 3 shillings 4pence, to pray for him upon pain of deprivation of his stall, and living thereunto belonging to the which article he did assent. Well, David Glover must have done a lot of praying because the chapter must have held TF in high regard, because musically and personally, for him not to be dismissed. But by 1573, TF had been named as master of the choristers, in addition to his role as vicar choral. The musicologist, Watkins Shaw, in research during the 1970s at St. David's, suggests that TF held this position as early as 1571, as he ranked in precedence below 4 ordained members of the college in chapter documents of the period. In his work on the composer, Thomas, Anthony Bowden believes that the original appointment of TF as master of the choristers at St. David's may have been, in fact, a general teaching position, rather than one associated with teaching choristers music for cathedral worship. It had been usual for one of the priest vicars at St. David's to serve in a teaching capacity to the choristers as bishop's vicar. By 1577, TF had also been appointed organ player or organist, in addition to his duties. An entry in the Chapter Act book on the 29th of April of that year shows that the stipend of a vicar choral was allocated to Thomas Tomkins' eldest son, Thomas, already a chorister. So we kind of guess that isn't the composer, that is the elder brother Thomas, in order to ease financial strain to the family. The same entry provides proof that T.F. Tomkins served as both organist and master of the choristers. It goes on to indicate that there were problems maintaining the statutory number of choristers. Whereas Thomas Tomkins, master of the choristers and organ player in this church, as well by his own report, as by testimony of others, declareth that he had not so great wages as others have had who occupied his place heretofore, and also credibly affirmeth that he is not able to live and continue a member of this church upon such wages and commodity as he now enjoyeth, but must of necessity be obliged to leave this church and to accept such a place as with greater commodity, wages, and living is elsewhere offered unto him. It is therefore ordered, constituted, and appointed that Thomas Tomkins the younger, son unto the foresaid Thomas Tomkins the elder, now being one of the choristers of this church, shall from henceforth to the end that his poor father, at whose finding he is, may thereby the rather be relieved, have a vicar's stall in the said Cathedral Church of St. David's, which one Richard Johnson lately held and is now void. And from the feast of John the Baptist next coming, shall and may enjoy all profits and commodities belonging to the same stall and place of vicar choral, without defalcation, according to the custom of the church. And it is further appointed, constituted, and decreed, and that there is now but one chorister in this church, besides the said Thomas the younger, the statute requiring 6 in all, 2 other children of years, voices, and aptitudes likely to do God's service, as appertaineth to a chorister of the foresaid church, shall be appointed by the chanter and chapter, so that at least there may be 3 of them continually kept and maintained. By 1586, the position of organist was suspended. Whether TF continued to receive the additional organist stipend is regrettably unclear. But by this point, Margaret, with whom TF had conceived Thomas the vicar choral, and Thomas, who would later to go on to be the composer, had died. And he'd remarried Anne Hargest of Penarthur, who can be described charitably as of independent means. Records show that the Hargest family, originally from Radnorshire in northeast Wales, had considerable wealth, ensuring that for the first time in his career, TF could consider himself financially stable. It is likely that after this marriage, TF took his family to Gloucestershire. His departure from St. David's came at a difficult time for the family, as the eldest son, Thomas, the vicar choral, had been expelled from his position for gross misbehavior in January 1586. The expulsion saw him taking to sea and eventually drowning aboard Richard Grenville's ship Revenge at the Battle of Floors in 1591. T.F. Tomkins' career ended at Gloucester, where he retired as precentor, dying in 1627. He lived long enough, though, to see his second namesake become recognized as a composer, the tribulations of the father providing the necessary springboard for the son's career. As without T.F.'s marriage to Anne, it's unlikely Thomas the composer could have gone on to study with Byrd in London, and indeed, his 2 sons from the marriage to Anne, John and Giles, became eminent musicians in their own right, John as organist of St. Paul's and Giles as organist of Salisbury. The connection with Byrd allowed Thomas the composer to retain a presence, even when taking the position as organist of Worcester Cathedral in 1596. Thomas remained very active on the London scene, as we heard at the beginning, contributing to Thomas Morley's magical collection Triumphs of Oviana in 1601, as well as providing some music for the coronation of James I and VI later that year. Tomkins' life as a madrigalist is important. His songs of 3, 4, 5, and 6 parts, published in 1622, show dedication to a range of friends, family, and patrons. The first in the collection rightly dedicated to My Dear Father, another to My Ancient and Much Reverenced Master William Byrd, and a further to a lively and quizzical friend, the composer and lutenist John Dowland. Further admiration shown by parodying Dowland's well-known Lacrimae Antiquae Pavan in the madrigal O Let Me Live. Upon Bird's death in 1623, Thomas became senior composer and organist at Chapel Royal, writing much of the music for Charles I's coronation. Whilst advancing in age and retreating from court to spend more time at Worcester, the 1630 Chapel Royal Anthem book contains more of Thomas Tomkins's compositions than any other composer, proof enough of the esteem he was held. Thomas's slow retreat to Worcester from court cannot be described as retreating from the busyness of life, however. Domestic politics in Worcester had pitted the cathedral chapter against the townsfolk, but far worse was soon to hit, as in July 1646, Worcester fell to parliamentary forces in the English Civil War. On the 23rd of July of that year, as many of the vicars called that could be gathered joined together in the cathedral for one last time before being silenced. During this silence, Thomas remained in the organist's house on College Green, quietly composing, revising, and copying his works. By 1654, however, he'd grown infirm and gone to live with his son and daughter-in-law in a village outside Worcester, dying there in 1656. But what of the musical brothers, John and Giles? Giles served as organist of King's College, Cambridge from December 1624 through to June 1626. By January 1628, he was in line for appointment as instructor of the choristers. Giles was supported by the dean, whilst the master of the choristers supported another candidate. This caused issue locally at Salisbury, as the candidate lived in the tied house. The dean forced through Giles's appointment as a lay vicar, causing the bishop to abdicate his right as visitor in remittance for a royal ruling on the entire affair. For on 28th of June 1629, Charles I's council ruled that Giles's appointment was confirmed, but that any further claim to housing would require future trial. Within a short period, however, the dispute seems to have come to rest. Giles was installed as organist and teacher of the choristers at Salisbury in December 1630. But it is clear that he was not exclusively the organist, as the role was shared, and that only toward the end of his life did Giles occupy that role solely. Like his brother, Giles combined his work at Salisbury with a court appointment, having been made a musician for the Virginals in April 1630. William Laud's visitation of Salisbury Cathedral in 1634, references were made to Giles's periodic absences at court. One Thomas Tomkins hath the charge of instructing the choristers in the art of singing. He hath been blamed lately for leaving them without a guide and teacher once or twice when he went to wait at court, but he promiseth he will do so no more, yet protesteth that they will all save to sing their parts perfectly, and need no teach in his absence. Giles' second son, also named Giles, what is it with that family, succeeded his uncle Thomas as organist of Worcester. However, it was a short-lived appointment, with Giles too taking holy orders and living near Worcester, remaining in them until his death in 1725. Brother John's career follows a similar trajectory as Giles's, organist at King's Cambridge, but not much more is traceable until he is sworn as a gentleman extraordinary of the Chapel Royal in 1628. It seems that John was already at this stage organist and vicar choral of St. Paul's. That cathedral's College of Minor Canons attested to John's abilities in the visitation in 1636, but little more is known as he died in 1638. What we see through that glimpse into the Tomkins family is not only a musical journey, but a journey of 16th and 17th century social mobility. From tin mining in Cornwall and the cloth trade to the most westerly point of the British Isles, to leading cathedrals and the court, the Tomkins family rise through musical and ecclesial society saw them cover a century of change. So earlier, we discussed the Stuart settlement and how it constrained the Puritan forces within the Church of England. But they were not the only extreme party. For whilst there remained a centre ground, there was a growing party within the church who pushed their own liturgical and ecclesiological tradition. Depending on the era and depending on their path, they're known by a number of names. Some of them were picked up by legacy groups 2 centuries later. Some called them High Church or Catholic Anglicans. Others refer to them by their leaders' names, the Hooker Andrews Law tradition, but most now refer to them as Laudians after their martyred leader, William Laud. As a tradition, it began simply enough in the enrichment of the altar, indeed honouring the communion table as an altar, and its associated furniture and the ceremonial associated with it. As its reach grew, a higher emphasis was placed on Eucharistic worship and on the conduct and presentation of worship in general. Its apostle was Lancelot Andrews, Bishop of Winchester, who set the first examples in his private chapel. The altar returned to the east wall and was adorned with the silk carpet, which lavishly lapped over the corners. Now we know it as a Laudian frontal. 2 lighted candles stood at each end of the altar, all closed in with ornate altar rails. Ceremonial, that for Puritans would have been near undistinguishable from that of Rome, flourished. The burning of incense, although there is evidence that thuribles of a sort were used in procession. The mixed chalice, a chalice of wine mixed with water, symbolizing the blood and water that flowed from the pierced side of Christ on the cross, again was high on the Puritan Romometer, although there are practical benefits to the mixed chalice, particularly for clergy who overconsecrate and end up having to consume it all. Ornamentalism is the key word. If it could be ornamental and spruced up, then it would be. For the vestment fans out there, this is the high point for copes. Whilst the copes in this image are post-restoration, it's clear that they follow the pre-Commonwealth design. Hoods attached to the cloak itself rather than to the orrery. Ornate, but remaining practical for use. The purple cope was worn for the funeral of Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mother, in 2002, whilst the red cope was worn at the coronation of the late Queen in 1953. Regrettably, the purple cope wasn't used a couple of weeks back, and whether the red cope will be used in May next year is debatable. One hopes so. But back to the wider point, for what we see challenged by the Puritans in 1603 at Hampton Court has been turbocharged by the Laudians. Reverences at the name of Jesus, a custom that never truly died out in England, was embraced. At baptism, infants were not only signed with the cross at the crucial moment, but were then borne to the altar. Kneeling to receive the sacrament became a key signifier of a Laudian congregation. Laud himself was reasonably restrained in his early ministry. Dean Overall at St. Paul's was the first to imply a higher Eucharistic doctrine than Cranmer had implied, by uniting the prayer of oblation to immediately follow the prayer of consecration. Bishop Andrews himself placed a heavier interpretation on sacrifice and sacrificial giving. He would get congregants to present their oblations at the altar after the creed. They would remain in the chancel for the consecration and communion, only returning to their original seats after depositing their alms in the poor chest after receiving the sacrament. Laud and his ilk not only held the Eucharist in high regard, but also their monarch. In Charles I, we see a man who would take well to the growing Laudianism within the church, and indeed, Charles became a great patron of Laud. Charles' marriage to the French Catholic princess Henrietta Maria caused consternation to Puritans and anti-Catholic groups within Parliament and the wider country. A Catholic court formed around the new queen, based at what is now Somerset House. Charles's prorogation of Parliament in 1629 began an 11-year tenure of personal rule, one where he and his court ruled as one, causing protest and dissent in opposition groups. His interference in religious affairs became his undoing. His intent that the Scottish Church would conform to new rites and practices, the Church of Scotland rebelled by banning the episcopacy and accepting a Calvinistic governance of presbyters, elders, and ministers. Charles refused to take this lying down and began the Bishops' War and the instabilities that led to the Civil War. Continued political opposition, uprisings in Scotland and Ireland, culminated in a challenge to the House of Commons, where Charles requested the House surrender 5 members to him, failing miserably and damaging the monarchy as an absolute monarchy forever. Parliament responded by seizing London, Charles escaping to Hampton Court, then on to Windsor. The Civil War had begun, and it did not end well for Charles or for Laud. Both were executed as part of the bloodletting at its conclusion. So we move on to worship and music in Commonwealth England. And I think it's really important that we get one thing cleared up to start with. Cromwell and his friends weren't anti-music. Their image as austere, stern, intolerant of music and dancing bears little resemblance to the reality. England's first full-time music publisher, John Playford, set up his business in 1648. Popular works printed in this period include The English Dancing Master, 1651, and expanded editions followed in the following year and in 1657. A Banquet of Music in 3 books consisting of lessons for the live of veal, almonds and sarabands, choice catches and rounds, etc., 1652. Airs and dialogues to be sung to the theorbo lute or bass viol by John Gamble, 1657. Opera as an art form was introduced into England by the playwright William Davenant, a noted royalist and Catholic who was up for execution, but reprieved through his Puritan friends. His opera productions included The First Day's Entertainment, 1656, The Siege of Rhodes, also of the same year, The Cruelty of the Spaniards in Peru, 1658, and The History of Sir Francis Drake, 1659. These performances were given at Rutland House before transferring to Drury Lane, the home of modern theatre land. Music as a form of domestic entertainment became highly popular in the period. Music clubs and music meetings became popular. Music lessons were incredibly popular. Writers of the period, including Milton, Marble, Bunyan, and George Wither, popularized music in their works. There's evidence that both Milton and Bunyan were skilled amateur musicians. For church musicians, one of the dark comic observances of the period is Oliver Cromwell's dirty secret. His love of the music of the Catholic composer Richard Deering. Deering's works were held in such high regard by Cromwell that he maintained a small musical staff to sing, amongst other works, Deering's Latin motets. He also had the organ, then at Magdalen in Oxford, transported to Hampton Court for his own use. Deering spent most of his working life based in the Low Countries before returning to serve as organist at the court of Henrietta Maria at Somerset House. One of his greater works, which is the one I've suggested you listen to after this session, is Factum est Silentium. It's a responsory for the Feast of Michael and All Angels. By 1617, when it was written, Deering was organist to the Convent of English Nuns of Brussels, and in the same year published his first collection of Cantones Sacra. The publisher was a noted Falaise of Antwerp, who also published music by Phillips. Factum est Silentium comes from the second collection, which appeared in 1618. Its declamatory, dramatic style shows clearly the influence of the new Italian Baroque style, which Deering's compatriots in England were perhaps slower to embrace. So we learn that music wasn't totally banned. And when you listen to Factum est Silentium, you're going to be left absolutely spellbound. Cromwell ensured that Charles I's court musicians were paid arrears of salary. Puritan Parliament put in place a scheme offering financial relief to dispossessed church musicians and appointed a committee for the advancement of music. Oh, for that wish after COVID. But whilst the Commonwealth leaders might be personally music fans, there was a definitive reversal of music in church, and naturally a repudiation of the lauding gains in worship, ceremonial, and doctrine. The Puritans were never a united group. To misquote from Monty Python's The Life of Brian, brothers, brothers, we mustn't fight each other. Surely we should be united against the common enemy, insurgents. The Judean People's Front, Brian, no, the Romans, insurgents. Oh, yeah. The term Puritan itself covers a number of disparate groups, varying from moderate reformers within the established church to dangerous extremists. Under its umbrella, it encompassed Presbyterians, Baptists, Anabaptists, Separatists or Brownites, Quakers and Independents, and even the lunatic fringe of groups such as the Seekers and Levelers. Trying to corral such a large group together was always going to be theologically difficult. So what were the grating issues within the movements? Firstly, church organization. In general, most of the groups rejected the Catholic threefold order of ministry of bishops, priests, and deacons. They were on the whole united against bishops and professional clericalism in appointments. The Root and Branch Bill of 1641's long title read, an act for the utter abolishing and taking away of all archbishops, bishops, their chancellors, the legal officers, commissaries, representatives, deans and chapters, archdeacons, prebendaries, chancellors and canons, and all other their under officers. In their place, a Presbyterian system akin to the one in Scotland, with a parliamentary guarantee that at least half of members would be elders, laymen. Secondly, doctrine and dogma. There was some groupthink when it came to the use of continental Reformed theology, but as ever, there were still arguments dependent on which school was to be followed. They naturally agreed on the primacy of the Bible as the only authority on which to base life and religion, justification of faith without works, the certitude of salvation for the elect, whoever they were, and Calvarian doctrine on predestination and the inadmissibility of grace. These tensions would remain within the Church of England long after Restoration and through to the present day, albeit reinterpreted and redefined in each era. Thirdly, worship. The High Lordian view of the Eucharist is dismissed as a concept. We return to the century before and the underlying theology of the second prayer book of Edward VI. The doctrine of transubstantiation and proprietary sacrifice are refuted in place of the commemorative character of the Lord's Supper, with the altar being degenerated into a mere dining table again. The prayer book was abandoned, the settlement of Hampton Court in 1603 totally rejected. No vestments, no sign of the cross, no beauty, no organs. All worship was centered on the word of God through Bible reading, psalm singing, and perhaps most of all, preaching. This is the era of mass destruction. A reasonable argument could be made that this is the true Reformation of England, where all has gone to hell in a handcart. Most cathedrals and churches are pillaged. At Westminster, soldiers broke down the organ and pawned the pipes in ale houses. At Exeter, they broke the instrument down, then paraded up and down the streets, blowing into them. At Winchester, they burnt the prayer books and singing books in the choir. At St. David's in Pembrokeshire, they faced some resistance, as some boy choristers threw stones at Cromwellian forces who attempted to destroy the organ. The choristers then hid in pulled-down bells, so not to be seen by the troops. Music libraries were destroyed. Some part books managed to be hidden, but most faced the flames. So widespread was the destruction that the vast bulk of rediscovered Tudor and Jacobean church music could only begin to be pieced together in the 20th century. The priest and researcher Edmund Fellows became the first generation of rediscovered, with many others following him through the mid to late 20th century. We now know that much was lost that will never be fully recovered. There's very little positive for us to take from the Commonwealth era, but there was one form of church music that they did embrace and whose legacy is seen today in modern hymnody, that of metrical psalms. C.H. Phillips, in his book Hymnody Past and Present, notes, from the moment of inception, the Reformation movement of the 16th century showed signs of division into two camps, a right and a left, to borrow the phraseology of continental politics. The right is represented by the Lutheranism, and in a still more marked degree by our own Church of England. The left, by the various bodies that are grouped together as Reformed or Calvinistic. The difference between Lutheranism and Calvinism is to be seen in their respective attitudes towards hymnody as well as in major matters. The former, while encouraging the use of German metrical translations of psalms, was willing at the same time to give free play to the poetic gifts of its members in the production of original hymns, and even to permit the adaptation of Catholic material for a similar purpose. Zwingli and Calvin, on the other hand, with their rigid insistence on the Bible and nothing but the Bible, frowned on anything save the metrical psalms. Thus, the hymn singing of the Reformed churches was virtually confined to these. Metrical psalters of these various churches were naturally closely interconnected, despite their differences of language. It should be added that while in doctrine, organization, and ritual, the Church of England was more Catholic than the Lutheran, in the sphere of hymnody, it followed for a long time the Calvinistic churches in its preference for metrical psalms over hymns. Metrical psalmody first appeared in England way back in 1562 in a version by Sternhold and Hopkins, later referred to as the Old Version. For all of its popularity and influence, it had a number of flaws. Out of 150 psalms, 134 were rendered into common meter or double common meter at that time, wholly associated with bawdy ballads and profane popular songs. The versification, when compared to Calvin's Genevan Psalter and later English works, was poor, often halting and labored. A case in point is the Gloria, which ends most canticles and psalms from the Book of Common Prayer, which we know so well. It's glory be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Ghost, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Compare that with the Old Version in an 8/6, 8/6, 8/6, 8/6 hymn meter, and it goes a bit like this. All Lord and praise be to the Lord, O that of might art most, to God the Father and the Son, and to the Holy Ghost, as it in the beginning was, forever heretofore, and is now at this present time, and shall be evermore. Laborious, and dare I say it, wordy for the sake of filling up the meter. They weren't tuneful. They were often quite dull and uninteresting, which when combined with text, would make them even more labored and painful. And from an idea that to each psalm its own tune, only 47 were written. Accordingly, word stress and melodic and harmonic painting gave way to chordic drudgery. However, it was in part successful. It is the first known inclusion of the old 100th psalm tune, which has remained a part of English hymnody ever since. Its living legacy is biblically based hymnody, some of which has endured to the present day, but as a vehicle for musical development, Kenneth Long doesn't hold back by declaring it a disaster. In our next session, we're going to look at the Restoration, the prayer book that came and still holds as our liturgical benchmark, and the music of that period, the English Baroque. Do hope you'll join in, and we'll have some less dire technical issues. Thanks for joining.
Thank you very much, Ben. That was great, and particularly good given the challenges which you faced during the course of it. Yeah, hopefully next time we won't have any intruders. Are there any questions? Do feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question.
Please do. It'd be lovely to hear some voices.
I suppose one question I had, perhaps whilst others are thinking a bit about it, is what, I mean, can you describe a bit what going to church, to a parish church might have been like during the Commonwealth, or would it have varied a lot?
I think it would. I think there's been a lot of variation. I think it's the nearest thing I can compare it to, which won't be helpful for most of you, is a Calvinistic chapel. You know, it would, you know, there'd be a lot of things that they wouldn't have been able to do because they wouldn't have had the resource to rip out the whole of the innards and remove it. But, you know, holy table, the altar would have become, you know, gone dining table. The elders would have sat somewhere appointed where they felt that was really important for them to be. And the preaching would have been key to everything. Whether it would have been that good or not is unclear. And of course, what's very interesting, I'll cover this, touch on this the southern next session. It is like this period does end up being something that they just pretend didn't happen. You know, it was like 19 years and then, oh, it didn't happen. but actually the half-life of it really did extend right through the 18th and early 19th centuries. So you do see in some places some re-engagement with worship at every level, cathedrals and in parish churches, but mostly, you know, we're now entering this kind of grey gloop, which, you know, Trollope wonderfully satirizes, where you have, you know, non-residents, where you had people collecting at least 6 stipends to boost up their income. I wonder if that would have happened had this 19-year hiatus taken place. Possibly, but maybe not as violently. And I think everyone was so concerned by the end of it that we can't go back to that. And then you see, of course, the splintering into separate denominations. So you then have, you know, we're moving about a century later towards Methodism, but, you know, we've got the Calvinists, the Baptists, the Anabaptists, those groups now really starting to plot and wend their own way away from the established church. So this is where we're at now, this kind of time where, and we'll touch base on this at the start of the next session, where it becomes almost like it didn't happen, and that we're clinging on to the conformity. And of course, what we see then is the conformity of the 1662 Book of Common Prayer, and the amazing work, or awful work, depending on your viewpoint, of Charles II in tying it into statute law and making it basically part of our unwritten constitution, making it incredibly hard for mere churchmen to play around with. And of course, there'll be a lot more to say about that after our week's break and we move on into the Oxford movement and the deposited prayer book.
Any other questions?
Before anyone jumps in, I'll give you the real reason. I did my MPhil work on the cathedral at St. David's. So so this is why I cover the Tomkinses, because Thomas is our kind of famous musician, the composer. And there was a lot of ambiguity about whether it was him who was that he'd started his musical career at St. David's. Well, the dates don't add up. So it's very clear that Dennis Stevens, writing in the 50s, which was kind of the first major reevaluation of source material for Tomkins, he kind of suggested that he kind of went down the view that Thomas was the vicar, that Thomas composer was the vicar choral, and it's very, very clear in the chapter acts that couldn't be, because the dates just didn't work. But it would have been very unlikely. Well, Dennis didn't get to St. David's. He came once to give a talk for 3 days and went. I don't think he ever went there again. So I'd be very surprised if he'd actually consulted those documents in those 3 days being there, given what I saw in the letters he had written arranging it, because I think they had a fantastic time celebrating the tercentenary of Tomkins, the composer. So but it is an interesting snapshot, because not many other composers have such a vivid lineage that you can trace. And it is quite remarkable, really, that even in a small place like that, you know, they managed to go off and do greater things. I did think I should have given you a bit more as to why I chose Tomkins. It was because I'd already done the research on him. I can see Charlotte's hand up.
Oh, sorry, Charlotte.
That's right. Just a quick question. I listened to the BBC radio programme, Faith and Music, presented by James Macmillan, about Tallis, which is very interesting because, unlike Tomkins, there is no linear history, there is no real record of Tallis. but you get his record through his music, how he responded. One day he's Church of England, next day he's Catholic, next day he's not quite sure, but he's still producing endless music. Is there a sort of parallel story through the music of Tomkins, or
not as much. I wouldn't want to say something against our most preeminent choral composer, but James is a very, very radical Catholic, and he probably would feel that what Tallis and actually Bird did was maybe sell out a bit, which was to keep their heads, granted.
Yes,
but
yes.
but I would imagine that probably if you slipped him a fizzy sherbet, he might say, well, he did sell out to the faith, and they didn't really mean it.
Yeah, but
I think he'd be right
about the quality, the music.
Yeah. But I think it's like anything, you have to write for who commissions you. So like Tomkins, it's clear that there isn't really much of a recusant streak in the Tomkins family. I think they swallow establishment good and proper because they're people on the way up. Yeah. Tallis, I think Tallis hides it much better than Bird. Bird, I think, is much more blatant. You have, because and obviously, Queen Elizabeth, he's a favorite of Queen Elizabeth. She's not going to cut his head off. She's going to tell him, you've been a naughty boy, don't do it again, or don't get caught. But and of course, you see a lot of the kind of the Latin stuff has only come to light in the past century or so with these people like Edmund Fellows, and then people like Dennis Stevens and Thurston Dart, and kind of that early music, that early to early modern music group, who were starting to be able to get these things together. And of course, they're having to go on bits of paper that they can compare and contrast. Now, researchers today, as I do, you can go into one record repository, take a photo and compare it with something across the country. That wasn't open to them, so you can see, so a lot of choirs now will be singing pieces which are probably misattributed, but it's a bit late now to try and argue the toss on it. The one I always go to on that is Rejoice in the Lord Alway, which is I think attributed to Retford, but about 6 other people as well. And it's just, trying to work out all these is quite difficult. So if someone had written Tallis at the bottom of a page and there were two pieces, one in Latin, one in English, they're going to try and claim they're both Tallis. Because researchers have egos, we all do. We want to be the person who finds the undiscovered Tallis gem, but it's not always that simple. And of course now technology allows us to go back and go, well, there's a fragment in a Durham part book, there's a fragment in a Christchurch part book, or in a Chichester part book, or a St. David's part book. We can marry them together, whereas even 30 years ago, that was incredibly difficult because you couldn't literally have a screen in front of you and another document in front of you, literally comparing and contrasting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Any other questions?
It might be done for the evening then, in that case. Ben, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you all for sticking with me. It's not fun when you get taken over, but hopefully we've learned our lesson, and it wasn't that dire. But if we'll say it's Mr. Putin trying to dust up English church music.
Exactly. Typically.
But no, it's great for you all to be for me to be with you all, and you all to be with me. So it's great, and we've got a week off next week, haven't we?
Half term, yeah.
Half term. So we'll Daniel, you'll be leading on the propagating when we next meet.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, in 2 weeks' time.
Marvelous.
same time. So I look forward to seeing you all then, and enjoy your half-term break. Go and listen to some Gibbons and Deering to
yes,
yourselves. Great, thanks everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.